We are talking in the middle about happiness. We're in the middle of a conversation. Over the past several weeks, we've talked about it. I would encourage you to go back and listen online if you missed out. I hope there's something, several people have given me feedback that's been helpful, thoughtful, meaningful. So I want to encourage you to go back because each week we're building on what we talked about last week. So one sentence recaps. I'm not going to give you the whole sermon, but one sentence. In week 1, we talked about nothing will make us happy because happiness isn't about what's, it's about whose. And at the end of our life, at the end of your life, you're not going to be on your deathbed and say to my family, if only I could have a few more minutes with my cell phone. If only I could have a few more minutes with my shoes. If only, we're not, because it's happiness is about who's, not what's. In week 2, we talked about nobody will make us happy. If happiness is about who's, people aren't going to make us happy unless we learn to forgive. Because we can't control other people's actions. And whenever they do dumb things, we hold on to that. It doesn't make them unhappy, but it makes us unhappy. And Jesus says it creates an emotional prison for us. And if we want to experience happiness, then we need to practice the act of forgiveness. So that's the past 2 weeks. Today we're going to build on that by talking about this. Know where will make you happy. And I can hear some of you right now, like, whoa, Pastor Mike, I'm a lot happier on the beach. or like I'm happy going down the mountain for some fresh powder, and there may be something else for you. But here's what I know. You might be happy for a little bit, but if that was the key to happiness, you wouldn't be here. You'd be there, right? If that was the key to happiness, you would have already found it and you would be there. But you're here. And so what does happiness look like? And what I think is sometimes we get this idea that happiness is something that we have to chase after, something we have to pursue, something somewhere out there. And we do that because we look around, whether it's people in our lives, whether it's people on TV, whether it's social media. We look around and we see other people that we think, wow, they must be so happy. And then we tell ourselves, if only I had their house, their kitchen, their car, if only I had their clothes, if only I had their hair, if only I had their looks, their health, their family, their job, then I would be happy, because we look at them and we think, wow, look at how happy they are. Right? By the way, a friend of mine, a pastor, told me the Instagram blessing. May your life be as happy as your Instagram appears. And we buy into that, right? Here's the thing. If you talk to them, they're not going to be happy, any more happy than we are. In fact, they're doing the same thing. They're looking at somebody else saying, if only I lived here, if only I did this. And the reason I know they're not any happier than we are, because there's some people who are looking at us and saying, wow, if only I was like Pastor Mike, then I'd be happy. And the truth is, all of us are in the same boat, just very different circumstances, right? All of us are pursuing or wanting or looking for happiness in a world that tells us happiness is somewhere out there. But what if happiness is closer than you think? What if happiness isn't out there somewhere, but happiness is close by? What if you're not as far away from happiness as you think you are? To look at that concept, I want to look at a letter that the early Christian preacher Paul wrote to Christians in a village of Philippi. It was actually a really large city. I shouldn't say village. Now, a little bit about Paul. Paul grew up a very privileged person. Paul grew up first as a Roman citizen, which in the ancient world when he lived, that was a tremendous amount of privilege right there. I don't think all the time we appreciate this, but if you have an American passport, 98% of the world envies you. Like, that is a precious commodity, just having an American passport that gives us all sorts of opportunities and privileges. The same thing was true as being a Roman citizen for Paul. It gave him tremendous opportunities, tremendous privilege. And then on top of that, he was born from very influential and noble Jewish parents. And so, which meant he had a lot of money, he had the best schooling, he had the best opportunities. As a young professional, he became a very prominent religious leader. His job, by the way, was to hunt down and to chase after and to stamp out by any means necessary followers of Jesus. And he was very good at his job. And so if you would have looked at Paul as a young man, you would have said, wow, he must be happy. I want to be like Paul. He has everything going for him by all the standards that we think of it. Until something changed his life. Anybody know what that was? What? Jesus. 98% of all questions preachers ask, Jesus is a safe answer. Awesome, that's right. Jesus changed his life. Has Jesus changed your life? Has me? If not, I hope you'll allow God to change your life. And sometimes that change, oftentimes I would say that change means turning our world upside down, which has happened with Paul. He lost all of his privilege. He lost his job, his stuff, his possessions, all the things that people would influence him. He lost it because he became a follower of Jesus. And instead of now chasing after and hunting down followers of Jesus, now he was the one who is the enemy of the state. He was the one hated by Romans, hated by the Jewish leaders. He was arrested, he was abused, he was punished, he was exiled, he was imprisoned, everything. And when he met Jesus, something happened in that encounter where he actually lost part of his vision. And he began having chronic illness that we don't know exactly what it was medically, but he went from everything to nothing. And he's in the middle of a Roman prison 2,000 years ago, and he's writing to Christians in Philippi. And here's what he says, Philippians 4:4. Be glad in the Lord always. Again, I say be glad. Now, if you think about this for a second, if anybody doesn't have a reason to be glad, it'd be Paul, right? Remember the setting. Be glad always. In fact, this is kind of his thesis statement. He's going to unpack what does it mean to rejoice, to be glad, to be happy in your circumstances, in his circumstances. He says this, verse 5, let your gentleness show in the treatment of all people. The Lord is near. I think that's interesting that he says, be happy, be glad. And the first thing he talks about is how we interact with other people. Why? Happiness is about who's, not about what's, right? And he specifically talked about being happy or being gentle, being kind, caring to other people around you. How would other people describe you? And I'm not talking about your friends or your family, but I'm talking about like whoever waits on you after you leave church today and you go to a restaurant. Or the cashiers at the grocery store, or maybe your classmates, people at school, or maybe your coworkers, or maybe your kids' teachers. How do they describe you? Or maybe the referee at the sports game. How would they describe you? Would they describe you as kind, as gentle? I won't tell you what they think of me. By the way, here's what I know. We think about treating them as kind or gentle. We think of it like we want to make them be happy. But I think we're missing the opportunity because what I've experienced, and some of you know, when we treat people, especially like in the service industry, where most of the world treats them as what's, they're there to do us a favor, to do us a job. We pay them. That's the language we use. But whenever we begin to flip that around and we treat them kind and caring and gentle, what happens is not only are they happy, but you know what? We're happier. It actually changes my attitude, my experience whenever I think about treating them gentle. And why do I do that? Well, what does Paul say? Because the Lord's right next to you in the booth, right? I hope, one of my prayers is that whenever Church of the Shepherd people go out after lunch, your waiters and waitresses say, yes, Church of the Shepherd people, they're the nicest and biggest tippers of anybody around. I hope that to be true. Why? Because Jesus is there with us, and I want to make sure I treat them like I want Jesus to treat me, right? So rejoice, be happy. The first thing is let your gentleness show in your treatment of all people. The Lord is near. Don't be anxious about anything. By the way, when Paul is writing about anxiety, he's not talking about the medical, clinical diagnosis of anxiety. He's talking about the more ordinary process of anxiety. If you have clinical diagnosed anxiety, doctors, therapists, medical professionals, God works through them to help us manage and experience healing and wholeness from some of the medical things that can go on inside of us. But Paul's talking about the ordinary, run-of-the-mill anxiety that we all wrestle with. So don't be anxious about anything. Rather, bring all of your requests to God in your prayers and petitions, along with giving thanks. And then the peace of God that exceeds all understanding will keep your hearts and minds safe in Christ Jesus. And my wife and I have this running joke. When one of us is a little anxious, the other one says, or sometimes now, the most recent time, you don't even have to say, well, Paul said. And that's all. If you say more than that, you're liable to get something thrown at you. Because saying don't be anxious isn't really helpful. But Paul doesn't simply say, don't be anxious. What does he say? Don't be anxious. Instead, pray. Instead, pray. Why do we pray? But one of the things I think is most of the time I'm anxious about things I have no control over, right? Most of the time I'm anxious about things I have zero control over, and yet they're creating anxiety. What's interesting is while I'm worked up and obsessed and freaking out about this thing that I have no control over, right next to me is the Lord. Is a heavenly parent who actually can influence things that we have no control over, that God does. And we kind of are like this 2-year-old that's working and stressed and trying to do it. No, let me do it. And we're trying to do it ourselves. All the while our heavenly parent is there and be like, you want some help? I'm happy to help. Why don't you let me help? And so Paul's saying, just instead of being anxious about it, do what? Pray. We know it. We don't do it, but we know it. And I think Paul's reminding us, pray to the one who actually can help us when we're anxious. Remember, Paul's writing from a Roman prison. Think he's anxious? He doesn't know what the future holds. He said, if I want to be happy, I'm not going to be anxious about things I can't control. Instead, I'm going to pray with petition, give thanks to God, and the peace of God, which passes all understanding, will give us. And he continues, from now on, brothers and sisters, if anything is excellent, if anything that's admirable, focus your thoughts on these things. All that is true, all that is holy, all that is just, all that is pure, all that is lovely, all that is worthy of praise. Practice these things, whatever you've learned, received, heard, or saw in us, and the God of peace will be with you. I love this because I think this is true. Whenever we don't focus our thoughts on the things that are right, meaning the things that we shouldn't do, whenever you're tempted to tell that little lie, it's a little, we don't call it a lie, it's a fib, right? Whenever we just take that shortcut at work, it's tax season, when we're like, let's do a little creative number reporting. Not that any of us would do this if you're listening online. We take shortcuts, we try to cheat, we try to sneak something, we try to get by with something. What happens is we're worried. What are we worried about? Uh-oh, mom and dad are calling. Uh-oh, did they find out? Hey, mom, what's up? Oh, okay, yeah, that's fine, right? You ever have that experience? Why? We're trading our happiness for a short-term cheat, for a little stupid lie, we're trading. And Paul's like, if you want to experience happiness, don't go doing those things. Just do what is right and pure and good and holy. Focus on those things. Because don't trade your peace and happiness for cheating, a little lie, for something dumb. Continues, I was very glad in the Lord, because now at last you have shown concern for me again. Of course, you were always concerned, but had no way of showing it. Why? Remember, he's in prison. Now, I'm not saying this because I need anything, for I have learned to be content in any circumstance. I know the experience of being in need and of having more than enough. Remember Paul's background. I have learned the secret to being content in any and every circumstance, whether full or hungry, whether having plenty or being poor. Now think about that. I've learned to be content in any and every circumstance. Now, where's Paul writing this? Probably from a Roman prison 2,000 years ago. Whatever you can imagine, just think about what that would be like. And if Paul could experience peace in a Roman prison 2,000 years ago, whatever you think that looks like, and where you are today, if Paul could experience contentment and peace in that, do you think we could experience contentment with all that we have today? Do you think we can experience peace in all that we have today? And I think what Paul is pointing to is something that we all know, that we buy into the lie that if only I had this, if only I did this, if only I was like them, if only I could go here, then I would be happy. And Paul's like, no. Happiness isn't out there somewhere. Happiness is right where you are, if you choose to see it, if you choose to experience it. Happiness is a change in our heart more than a change in our circumstances. That our perspective matters more to our happiness than our situation and circumstances. I know people, and I'm guessing that you know people who have far less than you do, who are actually far happier. And if you don't, I'd love to go work with you at one of our food pantries. Let's give out food and see how other people are living. Or even better, let's go to Mozambique, to our sister churches in Mozambique, who have unbelievably less than we do and are overflowing with happiness and joy. And the truth is, whenever we think, oh, this will make us happy, if only I was like them. I know people who have far more than I do and are alone and empty inside. Why? Because happiness isn't out there somewhere. Happiness is right here. And it's about our focus, about our perspective, about our change. Jesus actually talked about this in his very first sermon. So as a young pastor, he collected some disciples that nobody else wanted, by the way. They couldn't become a disciple of a real rabbi, so they decided to follow Jesus. And he's walking around preaching his very first sermon. And he's on the Mount, and I want you to hear what he says. This is from Matthew 5. It's at Matthew 5, 6, 7, we call the Sermon on the Mount. It's more a collection of like little teachings, more than one long sermon. But here's how he begins. Now, when Jesus saw the crowds, he went up to the mountain and sat down with his disciples. And his disciples came to him and said, happy are people who are what? Hopeless. Because the kingdom of heaven is theirs. Happy are people who grieve because they will be made glad. Happy are people who are humble because they will inherit the earth. Happy are people who are hungry and thirsty for righteousness because they will be fed until they are full. Happy are people who show mercy because they will receive mercy. Happy are people who have pure hearts because they will see God. Happy are people who make peace because they will be called God's children. Happy are people whose lives are harassed because they are righteous, because the kingdom of heaven is theirs. Happy are you when people insult you and harass you and speak all kinds of bad things, false things about you. Does that sound like Paul, by the way? All because of Jesus. Be full of joy and be glad because you have a great reward in heaven. In the same way people harassed the prophets who came before you. And this is the word of God for all of God's creation. And I want to notice a couple things that Jesus implies. First is Notice who Jesus said was happy. People are hopeless, those who grieve, those who are humble, those who do what is right, those who show mercy, those who are pure, those who make peace. By the way, it sounds a lot like Paul. Those who are harassed, those who are insulted. Who feels harassed and insulted and made fun of and is happy about it? Not me. Well, why does Jesus say that? And he says that not because of where they are, but because of what God is and who God is and what God is doing. And happiness isn't determined by your circumstances, rather by your focus. Right? You know this. A few weeks ago, Pastor Gina and I got to visit one of our people in our assisted living facility. And this person is just a joy to visit. I'm telling you, it's one of those visits where we just were talking and I'm like, wow, it's been a while. I need to go, and my spirit's joy. And by the way, this person has so many health issues. Can't get out of her bed. She has so many things going on. But it's just a joy and life-giving, and she's happy. And then we leave her room and we're walking down the hall. We get in the elevator. And there's somebody else there. And you casual, like, how are you? And started just complaining right out of the gate. And they're angry and they're bitter and they're resentful. And they live in the same place. And I don't know this other person. They're a stranger. I don't know their situation, their story, whatever else. What I do know is their health and their situation is far better than the person I just left, right? That's all I know. But their attitude is completely different. What's the difference? It's not about their circumstances. It has to be about the focus. You can experience it all different places. I love going to the grocery store and you have like 2 lanes in the same job, the same people, and radically different experiences. Why? It's about their focus. Maybe happiness isn't determined by our circumstances. It's determined about where we choose to focus, or who and how and what we choose to focus on. The second thing that Jesus applies, I think, is that happiness isn't something that we have to chase after. It's a gift that God's already given us. We think of happiness as something that we have to work towards. But what if happiness is a gift that God created us for, and you just haven't noticed? And that's what I want to suggest. So whenever you came in, you received some finger traps. Yeah. Depends on how bold you are, how far you stick in your fingers. I made the Saturday one. I went all in, and it created a real problem. There's a torn up one someplace. And have you done this? By the way, those of you worshiping online, I couldn't figure out how to get this to you. So you can stop by church. We'll have a few extra. They're kind of fun, and they keep us distracted while the preacher's preaching. So if you put your finger, by the way, the other reason I wanted you to meet some people around you is you may need help later. So you put your fingers in, and then you're stuck, right? And the more you stuck, the more you pull, the more you work, the more you strain, the more stuck you get. Ow, I'm with you. You went in too hard. I feel it. Rookie move right there. I'll go in. I'll go in now. See, all right. Oh, this may be a problem. Now, Paul's writing, this is my own prison. Paul's writing in prison. Wherever your situation is, whatever you're stuck, whatever you're struggling with, whatever you're worried, whatever anxiety, whatever your story is, and God knows every single one of our stories. In the middle of our story, no matter what stuck looks like, I want you to hear these words. Be glad always, right where you are. Treat others with gentleness. That's hard when you're stuck. Don't be anxious. You know the way to get out of it is not to stress and pull. Do what is right. Be content with where you are. And then you experience healing and wholeness and God's happiness that God created us for. Amen?